Financial crises are obvious, but only after they happen. Think about it. Every single major crash in history, the Great Depression, the dot-com bubble, 2008, they all seem so predictable now. Like we look back and say, how did people not see this coming? The signs were everywhere. The housing market was insane. Banks were lending money to anyone with a pulse. Tech companies with no revenue were worth billions. And yet, almost nobody got out in time. Not the experts, not the institutions, not the regular people who lost their homes, their savings, their retirement. Why? That's what we're going to explore today. Not the economics of crises. There are thousands of books about that. I want to talk about the psychology, the human wiring that makes us blind to disasters, even when they're unfolding right in front of us. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The next crisis is probably forming right now, and most of us won't see it until it's too late. Let me take you back to 2006. If you were paying attention to the American housing market, you might have noticed something strange. Home prices had been climbing for years. People were buying houses they couldn't afford. Banks were offering mortgages with no down payment, no income verification, no questions asked. Some people raised alarms. Economists wrote papers. A few investors started betting against the housing market, but here's the thing. Warnings about the economy are constant. There's always someone saying the market is overheated, someone predicting a crash, someone calling it a bubble. In 2006, most of those warnings looked exactly like all the other warnings that had come before and meant nothing. They looked like noise. This is the first fundamental reason people miss crises. Real signals are buried in a sea of false alarms. It's like the boy who cried wolf, except there are thousands of boys, all crying wolf constantly, and occasionally, very occasionally, there actually is a wolf. How do you know which cry to believe? Let me give you a more recent example. How many times in the last decade have you heard that the stock market is about to crash, that there's a bubble in tech, in crypto, in real estate again? Every year, someone credible is predicting disaster, and every year, mostly, they're wrong. The market keeps going up. Life continues. So when the real crisis comes, it arrives dressed in the same clothes as all the false alarms. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't look different. This creates what psychologists call alarm fatigue. When you're exposed to constant warnings, you stop responding to them. It's a survival mechanism. You can't live in a permanent state of panic. So your brain learns to tune out the warnings. The problem is, your brain can't distinguish between the false alarms and the real ones. They all look the same from the inside. There's another layer to this. Crises don't happen all at once. They happen gradually, in small increments. In 2007, some mortgage companies started failing. A few hedge funds collapsed, but these were small events. They looked like normal market fluctuations, not the beginning of the end. Think about it like this. If someone told you that tomorrow the entire global financial system would collapse, you'd think they were crazy. That's too big, too sudden, too catastrophic. But if someone told you that one small mortgage lender in California had filed for bankruptcy, that's just business as usual. Companies fail all the time. The crisis of 2008 wasn't one big event. It was hundreds of small events, each one looking like normal market activity, until suddenly they weren't. This is what I call the slow boil effect. You've probably heard the metaphor about the frog in boiling water. If you put a frog in boiling water, it jumps out. But if you put it in cool water and slowly heat it up, the frog doesn't notice until it's too late. I should mention that this isn't actually true about frogs. They do jump out. But it's absolutely true about humans and financial crises. We're terrible at recognizing gradual change. Our brains are wired to notice sudden threats. A lion charging at us, a car swerving into our lane. We're not wired to notice slow shifts in complex systems. Each day looks pretty much like the day before. Each month looks pretty much like the previous month. And then one day you wake up and everything is different. Let me share a specific story that illustrates this perfectly. In early 2008, a reporter asked the CEO of Bear Stearns about rumors that the bank was in trouble. He said everything was fine. The company was solid. 1 week later, Bear Stearns collapsed. It was sold to JP Morgan for $2 a share, down from $170 a year earlier. Now, was that CEO lying? Maybe. But I think it's more likely that he genuinely believed things were okay. The day before the collapse probably didn't feel that different from the day before that, or the week before that. The crisis was happening around him. It was happening inside his company. But from the inside, it still felt like noise. It still felt like normal business challenges that would work themselves out. This is the terrifying part. Even the people at the center of the crisis often don't recognize it until it's too late. Let's talk about a psychological phenomenon that affects all of us, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias means we tend to seek out and believe information that confirms what we already think, and ignore or dismiss information that contradicts it. This isn't a character flaw. It's not about being stupid or stubborn. It's how the human brain works. It's how we process the overwhelming amount of information we encounter every day. But when it comes to financial crises, confirmation bias is devastating. Here's why. Before a crisis, most people believe things are fine. The economy is working. Their investments are growing. Life is good. So when they encounter warning signs, their brain automatically filters them out. Not consciously. They don't think, I'm going to ignore this evidence. It just doesn't register as important. But when they encounter reassuring signs, the market went up today, experts say everything is fine, their neighbor just bought a new car, their brain grabs onto that. It confirms what they already believe. Let me give you a concrete example. In 2006 and 2007, there were articles in major newspapers about problems in the housing market. Some economists were warning about a bubble. A few investors were betting against subprime mortgages. But there were also articles saying the housing market was strong. Experts were saying that real estate always goes up. Banks were advertising great mortgage rates. Which articles did most people read? Which experts did they believe? The reassuring ones, obviously. Not because they were stupid, but because those articles confirmed what they already believed, that their home was a good investment, that the economy was healthy, that their retirement was secure. The warning articles felt like noise. The reassuring articles felt like truth. There's a related concept called social proof. We look to other people to determine what's normal and what's appropriate. Before a crisis, what do you see around you? Normal life, people going to work, buying houses, investing in the stock market. Nobody's panicking. Nobody's running for the exits. This social proof is incredibly powerful. If everyone else thinks things are fine, how bad can they really be? Surely, if there was real danger, someone would be doing something about it. This is why crises often seem obvious in hindsight, but invisible at the time. At the time, everyone around you was also not seeing it. The collective blindness reinforced itself. I want to introduce another concept, normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is the tendency to underestimate the possibility of disaster because it's never happened to us before, or because we can't imagine it happening. Most people alive today in developed countries have never experienced a total economic collapse. They've never seen banks fail, currencies become worthless, or entire industries disappear overnight. So when they try to imagine a crisis, they can't really do it. It feels abstract, theoretical, something that happens in history books or other countries. This is why you will often hear people say things like, the government won't let that happen, or they'll figure something out, or it can't get that bad. These aren't reasoned analyses. They're expressions of normalcy bias, the brain's refusal to accept that the unthinkable could actually happen. In 2008, normalcy bias kept people invested in the stock market even as it was collapsing. Surely it would come back. It always comes back. This is just a correction. And eventually, it did come back. But not before a lot of people lost everything. Not before retirement accounts were cut in half. Not before the global economy teetered on the edge of total collapse. Normalcy bias makes us wait for confirmation of the crisis. We wait for the obvious signal, the undeniable evidence, the moment when it becomes impossible to deny what's happening. By then, it's too late. Let me share a personal story that illustrates this. I've talked to many people who lost money in 2008. Almost all of them saw warning signs before the crash. They noticed things felt weird. They had moments of doubt. But they waited. They wanted to be sure. They told themselves they'd sell if things got worse. And then things did get worse. But not suddenly. Gradually. Each day was a little worse than the day before, but not bad enough to trigger action. Not bad enough to overcome the psychological inertia of staying put. By the time it was undeniably bad, they had already lost most of their money. This is the cruel trick of financial crises. The time to act is when you're uncertain. The time to act is when the evidence is ambiguous. By the time the evidence is clear, the opportunity to protect yourself has passed. But we're not wired to act on uncertainty. We're wired to wait for confirmation. There's one more psychological factor I want to discuss, loss aversion. Studies show that people feel losses about twice as strongly as equivalent gains. Losing $100 feels worse than finding $100 feels good. This has a strange effect on crisis behavior. If you're invested in the stock market and you start to worry about a crash, selling feels like locking in your losses. You're giving up. You're admitting defeat. As long as you stay invested, there's hope. The market might recover. Your losses aren't real. They're just paper losses. This psychology keeps people invested far longer than they should be. They watch their portfolios decline and decline and decline, always hoping for a recovery, never willing to accept the loss. I've seen this pattern repeat across every crisis. People hold on too long because selling feels like giving up. And by the time they finally sell, the worst has already happened. Now I want to zoom out and talk about something bigger, how systems collapse. We tend to think of crises as events, sudden dramatic moments when everything changes. But that's not how they actually work. Ernest Hemingway wrote about going bankrupt. Gradually, then suddenly. That's the rhythm of every financial crisis. Gradual deterioration for months or years, followed by sudden collapse. The 2008 crisis didn't start in September 2008 when Lehman Brothers failed. It started years earlier, with the accumulation of bad mortgages, with the creation of complex financial instruments nobody understood, with the relaxation of lending standards, with the housing bubble inflating further and further. By the time Lehman collapsed, the crisis was already years old. The collapse was just the moment when it became visible to everyone. This gradual, then sudden pattern is why crises are so hard to predict. During the gradual phase, everything seems fine. The problems are building up, but they're hidden. They're technical. They're boring. Then comes the sudden phase when everything happens at once and it's too late to prepare. I want to introduce a concept from systems theory: complexity. Modern financial systems are incredibly complex. They're interconnected in ways that nobody fully understands. When you deposit money in a bank, that bank lends it to other banks, which invest it in various instruments, which are tied to other instruments, which are connected to markets around the world. This complexity creates what are called emergent properties, behaviors of the system that can't be predicted by looking at individual parts. A financial crisis is an emergent property of a complex system. It's not caused by any single actor or decision. It emerges from the interactions of thousands of actors making millions of decisions. This is why experts often fail to predict crises. They're looking at individual parts of the system: housing prices, interest rates, corporate earnings. But the crisis emerges from the relationships between these parts. It emerges from the complexity itself. It's like trying to predict traffic jams by studying individual cars. You can know everything about each car, its speed, its destination, its driver, and still be unable to predict when and where traffic will grind to a halt. Traffic jams are emergent properties of the system, not the sum of individual behaviors. Financial crises work the same way. There's another systems concept I want to discuss: tightly coupled systems. In a loosely coupled system, problems stay contained. If one part fails, other parts can keep working. There are buffers, redundancies, firewalls. In a tightly coupled system, everything is connected to everything else. Problems spread rapidly. A failure in one area triggers failures in other areas, which trigger more failures. Modern financial systems are extremely tightly coupled. Banks depend on other banks. Markets depend on other markets. A problem in American mortgages can crash banks in Iceland. This tight coupling means that small problems can cascade into big problems very quickly. And it means that by the time a crisis becomes visible, it's often already too big to stop. Think about what happened in 2008. Mortgages in Arizona and Florida defaulted. This hurt mortgage-backed securities. This hurt banks holding those securities. This froze the credit market. This hurt businesses that needed credit. This hurt employment. This hurt consumer spending. This hurt more businesses. Each step followed inevitably from the previous step. The connections were already in place. The dominoes were already lined up. And here's the key point. During the gradual phase of a crisis, these connections are being created. The dominoes are being set up. But nobody notices because each individual domino looks harmless. It's only when they start falling that you realize how many there are and how they are connected. Let me talk about another aspect of how systems collapse: the role of trust. Financial systems run on trust. When you put money in a bank, you trust the bank to give it back. When a bank lends money, it trusts the borrower to repay. When investors buy bonds, they trust the issuer to honor them. This trust is usually justified. Most of the time, the system works. Banks give you your money. Borrowers repay their loans. Bonds get honored. But trust is fragile. Once it breaks quickly and completely. In 2008, there was a moment when banks stopped trusting each other. They didn't know which other banks were holding toxic assets. They didn't know who was solvent and who wasn't. So they stopped lending to each other. This was the heart of the crisis. Not the housing market, the loss of trust. Without trust, credit markets freeze. Without credit markets, the economy stops. The scary thing about trust is that it can evaporate overnight. One day, everyone trusts the system. The next day, nobody does. There's no gradual decline in trust. It's binary. Either you trust or you don't. This is why the sudden part of crises is so sudden. It's not a gradual slide. It's a phase transition, like water turning to ice. The gradual cooling happens over time, but the freezing happens in an instant. I want to share something that happened during the 2008 crisis that most people don't know about. For a few days in September 2008, the entire global financial system came within hours of complete collapse. Not a recession, not a market downturn, total collapse. Banks would have closed. ATMs would have stopped working. The supply chain would have broken down. This isn't hyperbole. This is what Treasury Secretary Hank Paulson later said happened. This is what Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke confirmed. The system was saved by massive government intervention, bailouts, guarantees, emergency lending. But it was a very close call, and almost nobody knew how close. Life went on. People went to work. The crisis felt like a bad recession, not the near-death experience it actually was. This is the nature of systemic risk. The system can be on the verge of collapse while appearing mostly normal. The problems are hidden in the complexity, in the connections, in the trust relationships that are fraying but haven't yet broken. By the time the problems become visible, you're already in the sudden phase. You're already falling.
So what can we do with all this?
I don't want to leave you with just doom and gloom. Understanding why we miss crises is the first step toward not missing the next one. First, be skeptical of normalcy. Just because things feel normal doesn't mean they are. The most dangerous moment is when everyone agrees that everything is fine. Second, pay attention to systemic risks, not just individual assets. It's not about whether housing prices are too high or stock valuations are stretched. It's about how interconnected the system has become, how much leverage has built up, how fragile the trust relationships are. Third, have a plan before you need one. Don't wait for the crisis to decide what to do. Know in advance what signals would cause you to act, and act on those signals even when it feels premature. Fourth, accept uncertainty. The time to prepare is when you're unsure, not when you're certain. By the time certainty arrives, it's too late. And finally, remember the core insight we've explored today. People don't miss crises because they're stupid. They miss them because the system feels normal. The next crisis will feel normal too. It will look like noise, not signal. It will arrive gradually, then suddenly. It will be obvious in hindsight, invisible in the moment. The question is, will you see it this time? Thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. Have you ever missed a crisis coming? Have you ever seen one that others missed? Let me know in the comments.